Chapter 5. Hooked on lemon drops, flightless bird, and waterless well. After doing the breakfast dishes, I rode my bike to the cleaners by the station. The owner, a thin man in his late 40s with deep wrinkles in his forehead, was listening to a tape of the Percy Faith Orchestra on a boombox that had been set on a shelf. It was a large JVC with some kind of extra woofers attached and a mount of cassette tapes standing by. The orchestra was performing Tara's theme, making the most of its lush string section. The owner himself was in the back of the shop, whistling along with the music as he ran a steam iron over his shirt, his movements sharp and energetic. I approached the counter and announced with suitable apologies that I had brought a necktie in late last year and forgotten to pick it up. To his peaceful little world at 9:30 in the morning, this must have been tantamount to the arrival of a messenger bearing terrible news in a Greek tragedy. "No ticket either, I suppose," he said in a strangely distant voice. He was talking not to me, but to the calendar on the wall by the counter. The photo for June showed the Alps, a green valley, cows gazing, a hard-edged white cloud floating against the Mont Blanc, or the Matterhorn or something. Then he looked at me with an expression on his face that all but said, "If you were going to forget the damn thing, you should have forgotten it." It was a direct and eloquent look. "End of the year, huh? That's a toughie. We're talking more than 6 months ago. All right, I'll have a look, but don't expect me to find it." He switched off his iron, set it on the ironing board, and whistling along with the theme from A Summer Place, started to rummage through the shelves in the black room. Back in high school, I had taken my girlfriend to see A Summer Place. It starred Troy Donahue and Sandra Dee. We saw it in a revival theater on a double bill with Connie Francis follow the boys. It had been pretty bad, as far as I could remember. But hearing the music now in a cleaner's 13 years later, I could bring back only good memories from the time. "That was a blue polka dot necktie?" asked the owner. "Name Okada?" "That's it," I said. "You're in luck." As soon as I got home, I phoned Kumiko at work. "They had the tie," I said. "Incredible," she said. "Good for you." It sounded artificial, like praise for a son bringing home good grades. This made me feel uneasy. I should have waited until our lunch break to phone. "I'm so relieved," she said. "But I've got someone on hold right now. Sorry, could you call me back at noon?" "That I will," I said. After hanging up, I went out to the veranda with the morning paper. As always, I lay on my stomach with the want ads spread out before me, taking all the time I needed to read them from one end to the other, the columns filled with incomprehensible codes and clues. The variety of professions in this world was amazing, each assigned its place amid the paper's neat rows, as on a new graveyard map. As happened this morning, I heard the wind-up bird winding its spring in a treetop somewhere. I closed the paper, sat up with my back against a post, and looked at the garden. Soon the bird gave its rasping cry once more, a long creaking sort of sound that came from the top of the neighbor's pine tree. I strained to see through the branches, but there was no sign of the bird, only its cry, as always. And so the world had its spring wound for the day. Just before 10, it started to rain. Not a heavy rain. You couldn't really be sure it was raining. The drops were so fine. But if you looked hard, you could tell. The world existed in two states, raining and non-raining, and there should be a line of demarcation between the two. I remained seated on the veranda for a while, staring at the line that was supposed to be there. What should I do with the time until lunch? Go for a swim at the nearby ward pool or to the alley to look for the cat? Leaning against the veranda post, watching the rain fall in the garden, I went back and forth between the two. Pool, cat. The cat won. Malta Cano had said that the cat was no longer in the neighborhood, but that morning I had an indefinable urge to go out and look for it. Cat hunting had become a part of my daily routine, and besides, Kumiko might be cheered somewhat to learn that I had given it a try. I put on my light raincoat. I decided not to take an umbrella. I put on my tennis shoes and left the house with the key and a few lemon drops in my coat pocket. I caught across the yard, but just as I set one hand in the cinder block wall, a phone rang. I stood still, straining my ears, but I couldn't tell whether it was our phone or a neighbor's. The minute you leave your house, all phones sound alike. I gave up and climbed over the wall. I could feel the soft grass through the thin soles of my tennis shoes. The alley was quieter than usual. I stood still for a while, holding my breath and listening, but I couldn't hear a thing. The phone had stopped ringing. I heard no cries or street noises. The sky was painted over, a perfect uniform grey. On days like this, the clouds probably absorb the sounds from the surface of the earth, and not just clouds, all kinds of things, perceptions, for example. Hands shoved into the pockets of my raincoat, I slipped down the narrow alley. Where close drying poles jutted out into the lane, I squeezed sideways between the walls. I passed directly beneath the eaves of the other houses. In this way, I made my silent way down this passage reminiscent of an abandoned canal. My tennis shoes on the grass made no noise at all. The only real sound I heard on my brief journey was that of a radio playing in one house. It was tuned to a talk show discussing callers' problems. A middle-aged man was complaining to the host about his mother-in-law. From the snatches I caught, the woman was 68 and crazy about horse racing. Once I was past the house, the sound of the radio began to fade until there was nothing left. As if what had gradually faded into nothingness was not only the sound of the radio, but the middle-aged man and his horse-obsessed mother-in-law, both of whom must exist somewhere in the world. I finally reached the vacant house. It stood there, hushed as ever. Against the background of grey, low-hanging clouds, its second-story storm shutters nailed shut, the house loomed as a dark, shadowy presence. It could have been a huge freighter caught on a reef one stormy night long ago and left to rot. If it hadn't been for the increased height of the grass since my last visit, I might have believed that time had stopped in this one particular place. Thanks to the long days of rain, the blades of grass glowed in the deep green luster, and they gave off a smell of wilderness unique to things that sink their roots into the earth. In the exact center of this sea of grass stood the bird sculpture, in the very same pose I had seen it in before, with its wings spread, ready to take off. This was one bird that could never take off, of course. I knew that, and the bird knew that. It would go on waiting where it had been set until the day it was carried off or smashed to pieces. No other possibilities existed for it to leave this garden. The only thing moving in there was a small white butterfly fluttering across the grass some weeks behind season. It made certain progress, like a searcher who had forgotten what he was searching for. After 5 minutes of this fruitless hunt, the butterfly went off somewhere. Sucking on a lemon drop, I leaned against the chain-link fence and looked at the garden. There was no sign of the cat. There was no sign of anything. The place looked like a still, stagnant pool in which some enormous force had blocked the natural flow. I felt the presence of someone behind me and whirled around, but there was no one. There was only the fence on the other side of the alley and the small gate in the fence, the gate in which the girl had stood, but it was closed now, and in the yard was no trace of anyone. Everything was damp and silent, and there were the smells: grass, rain, my raincoat, the lemon drop under my tongue, half melted. They all came together in a single deep breath. I turned to survey my surroundings once more, but there was no one. Listening hard, I caught the muffled chop of a distant helicopter. People were up there, flying above the clouds, but even that sound drew off into the distance, and silence descended once again. The chain-link fence surrounding the vacant house had a gate, also of chain-link, not surprisingly. I gave it a tentative push. I opened with almost disappointing ease, as if it were urging me to come in. "No problem," it seemed to be telling me. "Just walk right in." I didn't have to rely on the detailed knowledge of the law that I had acquired over 8 long years to know that it could be a very serious problem indeed. If a neighbor spotted me in this vacant house and reported me to the police, they would show up and question me. I would say I was looking for my cat. It had disappeared and I was looking for it all over the neighborhood. They would demand to know my address and occupation. I would have to tell them I was out of work. That would make them all the more suspicious. They were probably nervous about left-wing terrorists or something, convinced that left-wing terrorists were on the move all over Tokyo with hidden arsenal of guns and homemade bombs. They'd call Kumiko at her office to verify my story. She'd be upset. Oh, what the hell. I went in, pulling the gate closed behind me. If something was going to happen, let it happen. If something wanted to happen, let it happen. I crossed the garden, scanning the area. My tennis shoes on the grass were as soundless as ever. There were several low fruit trees, the names of which I did not know, and a generous stretch of lawn. It was all overgrown now, hiding everything. Ugly maypop vines had crawled over two of the fruit trees, which looked as if they had been strangled to death. The row of osmanthus along the fence had been turned a ghastly white from a coating of insects' eggs. A stubborn little fly kept buzzing by my ear for a time. Passing the stone statue, I walked over to the nested pile of white plastic lawn chairs under the eaves. The topmost chair was filthy, but the next one down was not bad. I dusted it off with my hand and sat on it. The overgrown weeds between here and the fence made it impossible for me to be seen from the alley, and the eaves sheltered me from the rain. I sat and whistled and watched the garden driving its bounty of fine raindrops. At first I was unaware of what tune I was whistling, but then I realized it was the overture to Rossini's Thieving Magpie, the same tune I had been whistling when the strange woman called as I was cooking spaghetti. Sitting here in the garden like this, with no other people around, looking at the grass and the stone bird whistling in tune, badly, I had the feeling that I had returned to my childhood. I was in a secret place where no one could see me. This put me in a quiet mood. I felt like throwing a stone. A small stone would be okay at some target. The stone bird would be a good one. I'd hit it just hard enough to make a little clunk. I used to play by myself a lot like this when I was a kid. I'd set up an empty can back way off and throw rocks until the can filled up. I could do it for hours. Just now, though, I didn't have any rocks at my feet. Oh well, no place has everything you need. I pulled up my feet, bent my knees, and rested my chin on my hand. Then I closed my eyes. Still no sounds. The darkness behind my closed eyelids was like the cloud-covered sky, but the grey was somewhat deeper. Every few minutes, someone would come and paint over the grey with a different textured grey. One with a touch of gold or green or red. I was impressed with the variety of greys that existed. Human beings were so strange. All you had to do was sit still for 10 minutes and you could see this amazing variety of greys. Browsing through my book of grey color samples, I started whistling again, without a thought in my head. "Hey," said someone. I snapped my eyes open. Leaning to the side, I stretched to see the gate above the wheat tops. It was open, wide open. Someone had followed me inside. My heart started pounding. "Hey," the someone said again. A woman's voice. She stepped out from behind the statue and started toward me. It was the girl who had been sunbathing in the yard across the alley. She wore the same light blue Adidas t-shirt and short pants. Again she walked with a slight limp. The one thing different from before was that she had taken off her sunglasses. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Looking for the cat," I said. "Are you sure? It doesn't look like that way to me. You're just sitting there and whistling with your eyes closed. It'd be kinda hard to find much of anything that way, don't you think?" I felt myself blushing. "It doesn't bother me," she went on. "But somebody who doesn't know you might think you were some kind of pervert." She paused. "You're not a pervert, are you?" "Probably not," I said. She approached me and undertook a careful study of the nested lawn chairs, choosing one without too much dirt on it and doing one more close inspection before setting it on the ground and lowering herself into it. "And your whistling's terrible," she said. "I don't know the tune, but it had no melody at all. You're not gay, are you?" "Probably not," I said. "Why?" "Somebody told me gays are lousy whistlers. Is that true?" "Who knows? It's probably nonsense." "Anyway, I don't care even if you are gay or pervert or anything. By the way, what's your name? I don't know what to call you." "Toru Okada," I said. She repeated my name to herself several times. "Not much of a name, is it?" she said. "Maybe not," I said. "I've always thought it sounded kind of like some pre-war foreign minister." "Toru Okada. See? That doesn't mean anything to me. I hate history. It's my worst subject. Anyhow, never mind. Haven't you got a nickname? Something easier than Toru Okada?" I couldn't recall ever having had a nickname. Never once in my life. Why was that? "No nickname," I said. "Nothing? Beer or frog?" "Nothing." "Gee," she said. "Think of something." "Wind-up bird," I said. "Wind-up bird?" she asked, looking at me with her mouth open. "What is that?" "The bird that winds the spring," I said. "Every morning, in the treetops, it winds the world's spring. Creak!" She went on staring at me. I sighed. It just popped into my head, I said. And there's more. The bird comes over my place every day and goes creak in the neighbor's tree, but nobody's ever seen it. That's neat, I guess. So anyhow, you'll be Mr. Wind-Up Bird. That's not very easy to say either, but it's way better than Toru Okada. Thank you very much. She pulled her feet up into the chair and put her chin on her knees. How about your name? I asked. May Kasahara. May, like the month of May. Were you born in May? Do you have to ask? Can you imagine the confusion if somebody born in June was named May? I guess you're right, I said. I suppose you're still out of school? I was watching you for a long time, she said, ignoring my question. From my room, with my binoculars, I saw you go in through the gate. I keep a little pair of binoculars handy for watching what goes on in the alley. All kinds of people go through there. I'll bet you didn't know that. And not just people, animals too. What were you doing here by yourself all the time? Spacing out, I said, thinking about the old days, whistling. May Kasahara bit a thumbnail. You're kinda weird, she said. I'm not weird. People do it all the time. Maybe so, but they don't do it in a neighbor's vacant house. You can stay in your own yard if all you want to do is space out and think about the good old days and whistle. She had a point there. Anyhow, I guess Noboru Wataya never came home, huh? I shook my head. And I guess you never saw him either after that? I asked. No, and I was on the lookout for him too. A brown striped tiger cat, tail slightly bent at the tip, right? From the pocket of her short pants, she took a box of Hope regulars and lit up with a match. After a few puffs, she stared right at me and said, Your hair's thinning a little, isn't it? My hand moved automatically to the back of my head. Not there, silly, she said. Your front hairline. It's higher than it should be, don't you think? I never really noticed. Well, I did, she said. That's where you're going to go bald. Your hairline's going to move up and up like this. She grabbed a handful of her own hair in the front and thrust her bare forehead in my face. You'd better be careful. I tossed my hairline. Maybe she was right. Maybe it had receded somewhat. Or was it my imagination? Something new to worry about. What do you mean? I asked. How can I be careful? You can't, I guess. There's nothing you can do. There's no way to prevent baldness. Guys who are going to go bald, go bald. When their time comes, that's it. They just go bald. There's nothing you can do to stop it. They tell you you can keep from going bald with proper hair care, but that's bullshit. Look at the bums who sleep in Shinjuku Station. They've all got great heads of hair. You think they're washing it every day with Clinique or Vital Sassoon or rubbing Lotion X into it? That's what the cosmetics maker will tell you to get your money. I'm sure you're right, I said, impressed. But how do you know so much about baldness? I've been working part-time for a wig company. Quite a while now. You know, I don't go to school and I've got all this time to kill. I've been doing surveys and questionnaires, the kind of stuff, so I know all about men losing their hair. I'm just loaded with information. Gee, I said. But you know, she said, dropping her cigarette butts on the ground and stepping on it. In the company I work for, they won't let you say anybody's bald. You have to say men with thinning problem. Bald is a discriminatory language. I was joking around once and suggested gentlemen who are follically challenged, and boy did they get mad. This is no laughing matter, young lady, they said, and they're so damned serious. Did you know that? Everybody in the whole damned world is so damned serious. I took my lemon drops, popped one in my mouth and offered one to May Kasahara. She shook her head and took out a cigarette. Come to think of it, Mr. Wind-Up Bird, she said. You were unemployed. Are you still? Sure am. Are you serious about working? Sure am. No sooner had the words left my mouth than I began to wonder how true they were. Actually, I'm not so sure, I said. I think I need time to think. I'm not sure myself what I need. It's hard to explain. Chewing on a nail, May Kasahara looked at me for a while. Tell you what, Mr. Wind-Up Bird, she said. Why don't you come to work with me one day? At the wig company. They don't pay much, but work's easy, and you can set your own hours. What do you say? Don't think about it too much, and just do it. For a change of pace, it might help you figure out all kinds of things. She had a point there. You've got a point there, I said. Great, she said. Next time I go, I'll come and get you. Now, where did you say your house is? That's a tough one. Or maybe not. You just keep going and going down the alley, taking all the turns. On the left, you'll see a house with a red Honda Civic parked in back. It's got one of those bumper stickers. Let there be peace for all the peoples of the world. Ours is the next house, but there's no gate opening on the alley. It's just a cinder block wall, and you have to climb over it. It's about chin height on me. Don't worry, I can get over a wall that high, no problem. Your legs doesn't hurt anymore? She exhaled smoke with a little sighing kind of sound and said, Don't worry, it's nothing. I limp when my parents are around because I don't want to go to school. I'm faking. It just sort of turned into a habit. I do it even nobody's looking. When I'm in my room all by myself, I'm a perfectionist. What is it they say? Fool yourself to fool others? But anyhow, Mr. Wind-Up Bird, tell me, have you got guts? Not really, no. Never had 'em? No, I was never one for guts. Not likely to change either. How about curiosity? Curiosity is another matter. I've got some of that. Well, don't you think guts and curiosity are kind of similar? Said May Kasahara. When there's guts, there's curiosity. And when there's curiosity, there's guts, no? Maybe they are kind of similar, I said. Maybe you're right. Maybe they do overlap at times. Times like when you sneak into somebody's backyard, say? Yeah, like that, I said, rolling a lemon drop on my tongue. When you sneak into somebody's backyard, it does seem that guts and curiosity are working together. Curiosity can bring guts out of hiding at times, maybe even get them going, but curiosity usually evaporates. Guts have to go for the long haul. Curiosity is like a fun friend you can't really trust. It turns you on, and then it leaves you to make it on your own, with whatever guts you can muster. She thought this over for a time. I guess so, she said. I guess that's one way to look at it. She stood up and brushed off the dirt clinging to the seat of her short pants. Then she looked down at me. Tell me, Mr. Wind-Up Bird, would you like to see the well? The well? I asked. The well? There's a dried up well here. I like it, kind of. Want to see it? We got through the yard and walked around to the side of the house. It was a round well, maybe 4 and 5 feet in diameter. Thick planking, cut to shape and size, had been used to cap the well, and the 2 concrete blocks had been set on the round wooden cap to keep it in place. The well curb stood perhaps 3 feet high, and close by grew a single old tree, as if standing guard. It was a fruit tree, but I couldn't tell what kind. Like most everything else connected with this house, the well looked as though it had been abandoned long before. Something about it felt as if it should be called overwhelming numbness. Maybe when people take their eyes off them, inanimate objects become even more inanimate. Close inspection revealed that the well was in fact far older than the objects that surrounded it. It had been made in another age, long before the house was built. Even the wooden cap was an antique. The well curve had been coated with a thick layer of concrete, almost certainly to strengthen a structure that had been built long before. The nearby trees seemed to boast of having stood there far longer than any other tree in the area. I lowered a concrete block to the ground and removed one of the 2 half-moons that constituted the wooden cap. Hands on the edge of the well, I leaned over and looked down, but I could not see to the bottom. It was obviously a deep well, its lower half swallowed in darkness. I took a sniff. It had a slightly moldy smell. It doesn't have any water, said May Kasahara. A well without water. A bird that can't fly. An alley with no exit. And May picked up a chunk of brick from the ground and threw it into the well. A moment later came a small, dry thud. Nothing more. The sound was utterly dry, desiccated, as if you could crumble it in your hands. I straightened up and looked at May Kasahara. I wonder why it hasn't got any water. Did it dry up? Did somebody fill it in? She shrugged. When people fill in a well, don't they fill it all the way to the top? There'd be no point in leaving a dry hole like this. Somebody could fall in and get hurt, don't you think? I think you're right, I said. Something probably made the water dry up. I suddenly recalled Mr. Honda's words from long before. When you're supposed to go up, find the highest tower and climb to the top. When you're supposed to go down, find the deepest well and go down to the bottom. So now I had a well if I needed one. I leaned over the edge again and looked down into the darkness, anticipating nothing in particular. So I thought, in a place like this, in the middle of the day like this, there existed a darkness as deep as this. I cleared my throat and swallowed. The sound echoed in the darkness, as if someone else had cleared his throat. My saliva still tasted like lemon drops. I put the cover back on the well and set the block atop it. Then I looked at my watch. Almost 11:30. Time to call Kumiko during her lunch break. I'd better go home, I said. May Kasahara gave a little frown. Go right ahead, Mr. Wind-Up Bird, she said. You fly on home. When we crossed the yard, the stone bird was still glaring at the sky with its dry eyes. The sky itself was still filled with its unbroken covering of grey clouds. But at least the rain had stopped. May Kasahara tore off a fistful of crayons and threw it toward the sky. With no wind to carry them, the blades of crayons dropped to her feet. Think of all the hours left between now and the time the sun goes down, she said, without looking at me. True, I said, lots of hours.